All right, so this month, April 2026, marks 10 years since I started my photography journey, all the way back in April 2016 when I bought my first camera, the Sony a6000. And in this video, I want to share with you guys a couple of the things that I've learned along the way, some of the most important self-learned, self-taught lessons that I want to share with you guys, some that I have echoed throughout my years of this YouTube channel, but these are some that I really just want to nail in and make sure that any beginner photographers watching this video can learn from, and maybe some experienced photographers as well can. All right, so let's go ahead and kick this off with the first one. Like I mentioned a minute ago, my first camera was the Sony a6000. And at the time, in April 2016, there were a couple well-known, trustworthy photography YouTube channels, but there were not nearly as many as there are today. So there was a lot more limited information available on YouTube, which was my primary source of information that I learned from. But there were plenty of photo blogs and stuff online. But one thing I always saw many photographers say, and that is that you should buy a Nifty 50 as your first lens. If you're not familiar with what a Nifty 50 is, it's essentially a 50mm 1.8. And I listened to this advice, and it was actually a huge mistake. Something that I did not understand at the time, and probably still would not have understood if you explained it to me, is that if you're buying an APS-C camera, which most entry-level cameras are, a 50mm lens is not actually a 50mm lens. A 50mm lens on an APS-C camera is actually about a 75mm lens, which could be great if you primarily want to do portraits, but it does not leave you with a whole lot of room for much else. And the reason that a 50mm lens becomes a 75mm equivalent field of view lens is because an APS-C lens is a smaller sensor than a traditional 35mm full frame sensor. So you got to multiply that by a 1.5 times crop, or 1.6 on Canon, I believe. But I found it extremely limiting in terms of the kind of photos that I actually wanted to take. You can say goodbye to taking any kind of photos indoors because you're not going to have a whole lot of room to work with because a 75mm field of view is so zoomed in. So to combat that, I ended up buying another lens, which was the Sony 10 to 18mm f4 lens, which is quite a good lens, but the 10 to 18 ended up being too wide, so I ended up not using that. So now I just recommend every beginner photographer just buying the kit lens, even though it's not the best lens. It will help you figure out what focal length prime lenses you might want to go with in the future. And the next thing is something that I'm still learning to this day and probably will continue to learn forever, and that is that rules are meant to be broken. Now, I'm thankful that in my early years of taking photos, I actually did not go to YouTube too much for advice when it comes to compositions or how to take photos or how to make videos. I think it's extremely important early on to just experiment and have fun and do whatever you want and take photos however you want. Don't let anyone tell you what to do. Don't let anyone tell you that you should always be shooting in manual mode. Now, it's good to, of course, learn how to use manual mode because it helps give you a little bit more control over the camera. I started out shooting in aperture priority for many years, and I never had any issues whatsoever. But then I started hearing people say that you should learn manual, and truthfully, I did not really understand the exposure triangle for the first 3-4 years of my photography. I don't think it really had a big impact on my photography in the long run. Now, of course, that depends on what kind of photos you're taking, but if you're just shooting portraits or walking around taking photos, then you're probably fine just shooting in aperture priority, unless you're using some kind of strobe or flash for your photography. And then when I started this YouTube channel, I would always film my videos and have my video camera in manual mode. Now, people will tell you this because you should always obey the 180-degree shutter rule, where your shutter speed should always be double your frame rate. Now, there will always be cases and scenarios where you do want that, when you want to have that proper amount of motion blur in your video. But it took me a couple years to learn that shooting in manual for video was actually just holding me back. And over the past couple years, I've been filming all of my YouTube videos in aperture priority, and no one has said anything because this is YouTube and it really doesn't matter. If you're working on a professional set or filming weddings, then yeah, most cases you probably will want to obey the 180-degree shutter rule, but you don't always have to for everything. And now we're going to talk about everyone's favorite topic on YouTube, and that is camera gear. When I first started out, I just had my 50mm lens and the 10-18. When I eventually upgraded to a full frame camera, I bought a 24-70 because that is pretty much the perfect all-around go-to zoom lens that will cover just about everything that you could possibly need it to. But I did end up eventually getting a 35mm 1.4 prime. The lesson here is to not get bogged down with too much camera gear. When you have too many lenses at your disposal, it's very easy to get decision paralysis, where you spend too much time thinking about which lens you want to use, which often ends up with you just not going out to take photos to begin with. Something I've talked about a lot on this YouTube channel is that it's best to just keep it simple and take a minimalistic approach when it comes to your photography. Don't have too much camera gear. I like to keep it simple with just one prime lens and then one zoom lens in my camera bag. Probably the most important piece of advice I can tell any photographer is to stop spending so much money on camera gear and spend more money on traveling and going places to take photos. Because you can have all of the nicest, most expensive lenses in the world, but if you spent all of your money on that and now you can't afford to travel and go to the places you've always wanted to, then what's the point in having all of that camera gear? And piggybacking off of that, we're gonna move from the lenses to the actual camera body, or maybe both depending on what it is for you. I cannot stress this enough, but it is so important to have a camera that you actually enjoy going out and using and just picking up and taking with you even when you don't have the intention of going out to take photos. After my Sony a6000, I upgraded to a Sony a7R II, and that is very much just a work camera. It wasn't very inspiring to use. It's very sterile. It's that classic Sony design where it's not really inspiring to pick up. It doesn't make you want to go out and take photos. It's just meant to get the job done. And that's great for work. So I often found myself just taking out my Sony a6000 with me instead if I'm hanging out with friends and just want a camera to take some photos with for fun. And that's what eventually led me to the Sony a7C and now the a7CR, because it reminded me of that a6000 and it was able to replace both of those cameras, the a6000 and the a7R II. Before the a7C came out in 2020, I was at a bit of a low point with my photography. I was primarily just doing portraits. I wasn't enjoying it as much as I used to, and then the pandemic happened, so I was not going out and doing portrait shoots as much as I was before. I was honestly close to a point where I was not completely quitting photography, but no longer chasing my dreams of being a full-time photographer. And then when the a7C came out, I knew I instantly wanted it. Now, you don't always have to have the latest and greatest. The a7C was essentially just an old camera rehoused into a smaller, more compact body, but it inspired me to get out and shoot and start this YouTube channel, which led me to where I am here today. So trust me, you do not need the latest and greatest camera. I'm gonna be sticking with the a7CR for many, many years because I'm happy and satisfied with it. And the next thing is that not everyone is meant to be a professional full-time photographer. I would say that most people are probably just better off keeping it as a hobby. Being a full-time photographer is extremely hard, and there's a reason I ended up here being a YouTuber, because I'm not a huge people person. I'm not very good at the business side of things. I was never skilled in that regard. I never had a mentor guiding me along that path. So if you can find a mentor and you really want to make it work, then I would highly recommend doing that. I did not have that. I just resorted back to the thing that I've been doing for 15 years now, making YouTube videos. So if you really want to make it work as a professional full-time photographer working with clients, you really have to make sure that you are better at the business side than you are at the photo side, because you can take the best photos in the world, but if you don't know how to work and interact with clients, then you're probably not going to get anywhere. I made it work for a little while, but I eventually realized that it was just not for me. And the last thing I'm going to end this video on is that it's just so important to just have fun taking photos. Especially if you are doing it full time, it is so important to get out and just shoot photos in your free time as well. It doesn't have to be the same kind of photos, but if you're going to make this a job, you also have to have that passion there on the hobby side as well. I was able to find the balance by keeping photography as a hobby and then doing video full-time. And that's what I would actually recommend to a lot of people if you want to work with cameras full-time, but you don't want to do photography itself full-time. But what it all comes down to is just never stop having fun taking photos. And switch it up when you need to. There is nothing wrong with that. If you guys have any questions in the comments down below, please let me know. And if you have any advice or any tips that you've learned over your photography journey as well, please leave it in the comments down below. You never know when the right person is going to see it at the right time when they're really needing it. So thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to help support the channel. And I hope I could inspire you guys to get out and take more photos. Go out and shoot.